Welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft, just a little past the bottom of the hour. Let's move on to some more of these top headlines, top legal headlines as well. Well, we learned earlier this morning that the former CEO of Abercrombie and Fitch, his name Mike Jeffries, and two other men were arrested on charges of sex trafficking and interstate prostitution that allegedly occurred when Jeffries was leading the iconic clothing brand. Our colleague, Fox News correspondent Alexis McAdams has more from New York.
Sexually exploiting vulnerable human beings is a crime.
Former Abercrombie and Fitch CEO Mike Jeffries is in custody, arrested in Florida on sex trafficking and interstate prostitution charges. His partner and an employee also behind bars. All three accused of luring young men into sex parties held around the world, sometimes promising those men modeling work.
He was using his power, his wealth, and his influence to traffic men for his own sexual pleasure and that of his romantic partner, Matthew Smith.
The 16-count indictment unsealed by federal prosecutors in New York alleges the men used fraud and coercion to exploit their victims, reportedly giving them alcohol, muscle relaxers, and drugs during the parties. Many say they were also threatened and forced to sign non-disclosure agreements.
They spent millions of dollars on a massive infrastructure to support this operation and maintain its secrecy.
Prosecutors say Jeffries ran this secret sex trafficking ring for nearly 7 years. This indictment involves 15 unnamed men, but the investigation continues and more victims could come forward.
To anyone who thinks they can exploit and coerce others by using the so-called casting couch system, this case should serve as a warning. Prepare to trade that couch for a bed in federal prison.
Jeffries' attorney tells Fox News he plans to respond to this indictment in court, not to the media. Reporting in New York, I'm Alexis McAdams, Fox News.
Alexis, thanks so much. In the meantime here, let's talk about this with our friend, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst, Neama Rahmani. He joins me. Neama, thanks for being with us. We wanted to get this in here. This is a major, major headline. I want to read from the indictment right now. It says, quote, many of the victims, at least one of whom was as young as 19 years old, were financially vulnerable and aspired to become models in the fashion industry, a notoriously cutthroat world here. So based on the indictment, based on the criminal complaint here, did Jeffries use his power in this world to do what is alleged?
Well, that's what the allegations are, Andrew, and what the government is trying to prove, and we've been talking about it a lot recently, to prove sex trafficking. You need one of three things: force, fraud, or coercion. Now, this isn't a Diddy situation where you have weapons and those types of threats of physical force, but there are some allegations that there were some Abercrombie security that were involved and wouldn't necessarily let these victims go. But I think this is more of a fraud or coercion type case. The fraud being that these young men were told X, and when they showed up, it would be something very different, and they'd be forced to participate in sex acts. And the coercion is what you mentioned, that they were promised maybe modeling gigs, or that their career would be derailed if they didn't participate. Now, we're seeing more of these aggressive prosecutions. Sex trafficking historically was human trafficking, right? But we're seeing more and more, whether it's in the Southern District of New York with the Combs case, or now in the Eastern District of New York, which of course prosecuted R. Kelly, and the NXIVM case, that they're taking these types of cases a lot more seriously.
Yeah, I want to just put up, you've been tweeting about this today, Neama. Let's bring in some of that analysis here. You say this: prosecutors in the Eastern District of New York love to charge RICO in these cases, but they didn't. You say they may have statute of limitations issues because the RICO statute is 5 years and the last alleged conduct was in 2015. But this stems, Neama, from 2008 to 2015, a 7-year time span, but of course almost 10 years ago since the latest allegation here. So is that outside of the statute of limitations here? That's why they didn't charge with RICO? Could they have done both if they had that?
Well, potentially, yes. And, obviously we're talking about some older allegations here. So RICO generally has a 5-year statute of limitations. But once you have one overt act within that 5 years, you can go back another 10 years you get a second overt act. So in Combs's case, for instance, that's how prosecutors are able to go back all the way to 2016 to get that beating of Cassie Ventura into the indictment. And of course, you can charge as RICO acts even state crimes that are outside the statute of limitations. So it's a very broad and powerful statute. I'm just guessing as to what the defenses are going to be in this case. Someone obviously with Jeffries means he's not going to take any deal. He's 80 years old. It'd be tantamount to a life sentence. Obviously, on one hand, he's going to argue that this was all consensual. There's nothing unlawful with having a sexual relationship with your boss to try to get ahead. Now, it may be civil sexual harassment, but it's not necessarily criminal. So obviously, we know that one argument is going to be consent on the merits. The other, of course, will be that there is a procedural defect because of the statute of limitations.
I mean, the indictment does, though, allege non-consensual activity here. I just want to ask this, too. I bring up the fact that these allegations are older, I mean, stemming from 2008 and onward here. And this somewhat serves the point that I'm making about how these cases are brought into the public consciousness. You noted this, Neama, that the BBC documentary on this blew this case wide open and is yet another example of the power of journalism, i.e. Epstein, i.e. R. Kelly, i.e. you can argue the Menendez brothers, the Netflix documentary bringing that case back into the spotlight here. What do we know about the BBC documentary? Could you draw a straight line from that to now?
I think so. It's not a straight line. It's that on top of the civil lawsuits that were filed on behalf of the victims. Obviously, in any type of sexual assault case, you need a victim who's ready, willing, and able to come forward and testify. That's what's required in a criminal case. The defendant has a right to cross-examine his or her accuser. So if you're a prosecutor, you don't have that victim, well, you don't have much of a case. So now you have victims who've gone on record with the BBC, who have filed civil lawsuits. So you have them. And obviously, and we've talked about it time and time again, it can be Epstein, it can be Weinstein, it can be Cosby, Diddy, of course. There are countless examples. Sometimes it's hard for jurors to return a guilty verdict when there's just one or two or three victims. But when it's victim after victim, you can really overwhelm the defense. And if they're all telling the same story, they show up at these parties, they were drugged, there were terrible things done to them that I can't say on TV, but folks can read the indictment themselves. I mean, that is going to be very difficult to defend if you're Jeffries' lawyers. And we know he has significant means. He put up a $10 million bond.
Wow.
He's out free right now. One of the other co-defendants, his partner with ties to Britain, he was detained, but the other defendant was released on a $500,000 bond. So these are cases, again, that are likely going to go to trial. There's not really plea offers that can be made, especially for Jeffries, because he's, of course, the main target of the investigation.
Yeah, just a little bit further on this, because there is a third defendant, his name, James Jacobson. He's 71. I mean, the defendants are up there in age. According to the indictment, he was employed to recruit men to, quote, perform commercial sex acts for Jeffries and the 61-year-old Smith, Jeffries' partner there. This was a 16-count indictment today in the Eastern District of New York. We'll just have to stay with it. Neama, while we have you, though, let's stay in New York just briefly here. And I want to get your thoughts, your comments, if we can bring up a shot there of New York City, on another case involving a major high-profile figure. That's Harvey Weinstein. Well, yesterday, Neama, we learned that Harvey Weinstein was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia, that's bone marrow cancer, as he awaits his retrial there in New York on these sexual assault and sexual abuse allegations here. I want to ask, because we know, what was that, a month ago, Harvey Weinstein underwent emergency open heart surgery. About a month later, we learn he has this cancer diagnosis here. How would that impact his trial? Does a cancer diagnosis necessarily delay proceedings even further while you get treatment? I mean, we know Harvey Weinstein has had a slew of really major health problems while he's been incarcerated here. This, though, very serious. How will it impact the trial, if at all?
It will impact the trial. If he's not healthy enough to come to court, then that's going to delay everything. We saw it in another big case that was actually blown open by a documentary, too. That was Bob Durst, who was of advanced age, and his trial was delayed in Los Angeles. Ultimately, he was convicted, but he died before he was even sentenced. And, Harvey Weinstein, we all saw his first trial there in New York. A lot of folks thought maybe he was malingering or trying to get sympathy for the jury, but obviously he was convicted. That conviction was overturned on appeal. But he has to be retried. And the question is his health in such a condition that he's going to be able to survive until he gets to trial, much less to get through the trial and to get to sentencing? I don't know that answer, but at least judging as a layperson, he looks like he's in pretty bad shape and his days are numbered.
I mean, he's getting treatment at Rikers, where he's currently being incarcerated here for bone cancer. Rikers is notoriously, I mean, it's a tough prison there outside of New York as well. Now, the news of his diagnosis, we got a statement in basically from Weinstein's legal representative saying this: out of respect for Weinstein's privacy, we will offer no further comments. So they're not really commenting on this, Neama, very much. Where does it go from here, do you think?
Well, where it goes is he's going to stay in custody pending a new trial, and he's not going to get out, notwithstanding the New York conviction being overturned on appeal, because, of course, he has to serve a sentence here in California, 20 plus years. So he is going to die in prison, whether it's at Rikers Island, whether it's a California state prison. He's not going to get out of prison. Now, obviously, the New York victims do deserve their day in court.
Right.
They were victims of sexual assault. But for all intents and purposes, practically speaking, Weinstein isn't going anywhere. It's just a question of where is he going to die.
Wow. All right, Neama Rahmani, we'll leave it at that. Thanks so much for your time, your insight. We'll definitely speak soon.
Thanks for having me, Andrew.